Welcome to Christian Statesman. I'm your host, Zach Wagner, and this is episode 30, The Old World and the New. Like so many middle-aged Americans, now trending towards the irrelevance of senior citizenship, I am a child of the 60s. People like me can still remember when the Beatles were a thing. I grew up in a traditional family where father worked while mother took great pride in staying home and applying her considerable talents to raising a family. I was the oldest of 5, schooled in the traditions of a solid Christian home, even going to a Christian private school during my elementary years. Every summer we would return to the farm my father grew up on in rural Indiana, not far from the Ohio border. In that town, even though it had been over 2 decades since he graduated in a class of 27 from the local high school, everyone still knew my father. He knew everyone, including the local drugstore owner, the local grocer, and the school principal. Other than the model of car in the driveway and the tractor in the barn, not much had changed among these great people of Indiana since the beginning of the 20th century. The community was dominated by local farmers and mom-and-pop businesses. Everyone worked together to sustain their community and look out for their neighbors. Customers were not just customers, but your neighbors and friends. There was a great sense of independence and unity among the townsfolk, as the ethic of looking out for each other was central to their daily philosophy of living. God, family, community, and country were the mantra that everyone embraced. When the flag was raised, people placed their hands over their hearts. America stood for freedom. They knew that. Many of them had fought in the Second World War to defend those very freedoms. They were indeed part of the greatest generation, the generation that watched America grow into the full bloom of her possibilities. These people cared little what race or gender you were. They only cared that everyone had what they needed and got along. If a neighbor had trouble, folks would come to their aid and rally around them to provide what help they could. The Great Depression hit them, but they made it through easily as communities worked together. They made it through a war despite losing many of their young men. But as I went through high school and into college in the early 80s, things were beginning to change. Large corporations and large media empires were being built. Cable TV turned 4 stations into 40, then into hundreds. The small-town standard that was so prominent in the 50s gave way to burgeoning suburbs and urbanization. Eventually, America became much smaller as we began to enter a new and unexplored cyber world. Information multiplied, but somehow all of this newly available knowledge did not bring us any closer together. In fact, in some respects, it seems to have driven us farther apart. Slowly, although we have advanced significantly in technology, we have been remaking America into something that the old farmers and shopkeepers from rural Indiana simply would not recognize. We have advanced tremendously over the last 40 years. The boom of the 80s led to cycling booms and busts over the next 30 years. In many respects, we have accumulated more material wealth than ever. America has, from the point of view of technology and consumerism, been blessed beyond measure over the last several decades. We have obtained a prosperity that the old folks back in the 60s could not even imagine, even in their wildest imagination. When we have it better than ever and call that unjust, we have a problem. When the lowest classes of Americans now live better than over half of the rest of the planet and call that gross inequity, we need to examine our framework. If you were born after 1985 to 1990, you do not recognize or remember this older and more original America. You only know a wired and connected world that has shrunk in size but is also shriveled in its values and moral absolutes. The old America we knew was upright and powerful in her unmoving resolve to be unified at the family and community level. This localized concern translated into a strong and unified nation. Now, we are subject to power brokers and pundits from all directions that would seek to balkanize, compartmentalize, and divide this nation according to whatever ethnic, social, or political lines they can conjure. The unity and strength of our nation that was inherent in our fundamental commonalities is being rapidly obscured by ideological concoctions of the most fantastic nature. If we are to preserve a nation, we must rediscover our common ground. It has always been there. It is right beneath our feet. We must choose to see it, recognize it for what it is. We, as freedom-loving Americans, have far more in common than we could ever point to as differences. We must not allow those who would exploit those differences to hold sway over us or dominate our dialogue. Our very survival and continuance as a nation depends on it. Just ask someone a little older who has lived to see the difference. Thank you for listening to Christian Statesman. We hope you'll come back often and subscribe, and as always, tell your friends.